mo omurtiale mitalnga talo pangkela David Proctor, President National Development Bank Rikita Rapulur Belaw, regarding ang mura Saudi Loan Fund, ngi ngaringi omungat makleler elang era committee banking and financial matters. Malaway President Senate Senator Mark Rutim Angartiang labanggel Vice Chairman na committee at ngakal Senator Oldabe Senator Sungino Senator ng mga saw. Yang ngakal Chairman na ulmakotong ortal meeting ele kata kilt makli committee report ngilul mo raulaw ya dire kata mleti furngil ngaringay gigidal bebir agora sawadra al seltial loan agreement resolution itself. Arbebir al senator sa ngaringa al sengdir mengmulatakal separil me tuam el al sils. Mang David Proctor, I was just emphasizing the work of the committee that held a session and we deferred the resolution for the Saudi loan. Regarding the Saudi loan, there are other pending questions and issues that some senators have. So there's a reason why we called upon you to appear today and might help us deliberate some of those issues and get an understanding on the situation that the Saudi loan and the agreement itself is for. Regardless of that, let me give you a chance to introduce yourself and also elaborate a little bit more on the Saudi loan fund.
Thank you, Chair. President of the Senate, Senators, thank you for inviting me to the committee meeting today. As CEO for the National Development Bank, clearly I have a significant interest in ensuring that this loan meets the needs of Palau and its people and is structured in the appropriate way. So to give you some context, I think this discussion has been underway for some months now with the Saudi Fund for Development. Saudi Fund for Development are an internationally well-known development fund. The transaction that they are proposing with Palau is unusual for the fund for the following reasons. Firstly, typically, if I can call them SFD for Saudi Fund for Development, so typically SFD fund huge development projects, multi-billion-dollar single development projects. It could be a big suspension bridge, a big toll road. It's very unusual for them to consider a loan of this, in their terms, small size. It's an important loan for Palau, but from a Saudi perspective, $15 million is probably not a rounding number in their portfolio. And the second element of that is that the way that we intend to use this loan is for a series of small projects, not just one big project. So for those two reasons, the structure of this loan is unusual for SFD. I think as a foreigner trying to support Palau, I think Palauans should feel very proud that the Saudis are willing to look to support Palau. And clearly Palau is a long way from Saudi. This would be the first time that Saudi, as I understand it, has provided this type of financing. So I think in terms of international recognition and standing for Palau in the international financing community, this is a very significant step. But because of that background, it's taken us some time to structure the terms of an agreement that can fit both parties. And I think where I would conclude is that the Saudis have tried very hard to adjust their standard template and terms and conditions to meet the needs of Palau. And at the same time, we've tried our best to find a compromise position which does not weaken the overall standing of Palau. Now, there are some terms and conditions in the loan document which are, I think, issues for government level to answer. From my perspective, I can cover the specifics of the banking elements in the loan. But one of the questions that you may have is, what is the intended purpose of this loan? So the intention is for SFD to lend the money to the Republic, and for then a subsidiary loan agreement to be put in place between the Republic and the National Development Bank on the same repayment terms in terms of length and interest rate for the loan. What we would use the loans for, in the document we're allowed to use the funding for housing, but also for tourism, agriculture, fishing, and aquaculture sectors. But in my mind, what I really want to use this funding for is I'm in discussions with 2 states at the moment. And the idea that I have is that the Development Bank needs to do more to enable affordable housing for Palauans to be constructed. So simply put, as I see it, the states own a lot of land but don't have money to develop their land. The bank, if the bank had this proceeds from the Saudi loan, the bank would have the money. We don't own the land. So what I'm looking to do is enter into a joint venture arrangement with the states. 2 states already we're in discussions with. And effectively, the bank would then finance the infrastructure costs as well as the construction costs of condominiums, which would then be sold and or leased just to Palauans. I don't want it sold to US military, I just want it for Palauans. The sale of those condos would be used to repay the loan that NDBP would make to this joint venture. And obviously, ultimately, that money would be refunded back to SFD. You may also have a question on why is it that it's a $15 million loan, but it's drawn down over a period of 5 years? Why is it not fully drawn down in one amount up front? And the answer to that is because that's what I asked for. And the reason I asked for it is, if we receive $15 million in one lump sum today, I would immediately have to start to pay an interest charge on that money. But I wouldn't be able to deploy $15 million immediately. So what I discussed with the Saudis was, can we have a structure which allows me to gradually draw down the loan as I need to access the funds, with a provision that I can go back to SFD and say, actually, I thought this year I'd only need 5 million. I need more than that. So can I have more, draw it down sooner? And that's why there's a flexible provision in there where I can go and ask the Saudis for that. So I'm trying to find a balance between having the funds we need to construct this affordable housing without having too much money sitting unused in a bank account that I'm having to pay an interest charge on. So that's the background for that structure. But Chair, perhaps that's enough as an introduction for now.
Thank you for that, Mr. David. But the intent of the loan is to have Ministry of Finance and the government to get a loan. And it's kind of more of a bridge loan from from our government to the National Development Bank. The intent of the loan is it's basically to support and increase the capital availability of funds in the National Development Bank. But we have issues and concerns on some of the waivers or exemptions within the loan agreement. And those are, one is the tax, and another one is the sovereign immunity, and we have an Open Government Act. that were embedded into the resolution itself. So we took them out from the resolution, and then we gave the resolution only the authority to the president to incur and negotiate with the loan agreement. In regards to that, some of the senators have issues with the tax waiver. If you can, you will explain that. And overall, so the sovereign immunity and the Open Government Act itself. Can you explain why those are embedded in the loan agreement and kind of clear them up a little bit for understanding?
The negotiation on those specific clauses was handled by the attorney from the President's office. But in conversations that I've had with the President's office about those, it's clear that those provisions are standard provisions that the SFD have in their loan documents. So as it relates to the tax, I think the context to this is that SFD are very aware that the terms and conditions of their loans are very attractive relative to current market rates. And their concern is that countries don't take the money from Saudi in order to repay other money that has been provided to those countries by other countries, whether it be any country in the world that provides development funding. At the same time, they don't want the beneficiary of the loan, which is the Republic, to use these funds for their own purpose, to take some tax benefit from this transaction and invest it for their own purpose outside of the intended use of the proceeds that SFD have said we can use it for. So the intent for the tax clause is to ensure, from a Saudi perspective, that 100% of whatever money they lend to Palau is used for the stated purpose in the loan. They don't want some carve-out by any government for its taxation purposes.
So basically, what you're saying is that the tax waiver or exemption. So those are only embedded for the drawdown of the fund itself and also for the payout.
Yes.
I mean, if you're making payment to the loan itself, you don't tax the payment itself. Is that what it is? So basically, it's only for the funding and not for the project itself.
Yes. So, for example, in international taxation, there's something called a withhold tax that many countries apply to repayments. So the Saudis want to make sure that when we repay the loan to the Saudis, including the interest charge, there is no withholding tax that is made on the payment. And just to clarify, this tax waiver, as I read it, only applies to transactions relating to this loan. This is not an overall tax waiver for anything that Palau may do in the future in other situations with SFD. It just relates to transactions under the loan.
I think that kind of sums up some of the questions that brought up to brought up some from some of the senators during our deliberation on this matter. I'll open the floor for anyone that may want to ask any question. And there's floor leader Cecilia Lalabel and Tapsung and then we have Senator Mangasao, and then we can move on to the other side of the table, maybe Senator Mark Rudim. Mang floor nga rin ako ra sa man ma-start rin ito, oral maliliwek ratib.
Sula Chair, good afternoon, Mr. Proctor. First of all, I'm glad that, to hear that you have been part of the discussion about this fund from the beginning, and you basically have a good understanding of the background for the purpose of this loan, and of course have given your plans and ideas how to make the most out of the loan proceeds. So I'm glad you have already making some planning for the use of this loan if indeed it becomes available for the NDBP. I guess I have no question about those the terms and conditions. I think it's pretty standard as I have reviewed them and compare it with the previous government loans. So there's not much of a difference. Of course, the sovereign immunity is always a given condition for any loans, foreign loans coming to the Republic. And I think that's the same that applies to every other countries and other institutions. But I guess my question is, you mentioned earlier that this particular SFT normally finance large projects that are multi-millions. Probably this loan for Palau is probably the least amount of loan that they're offering, and so was there any part of the discussion about the amount, the initial amount? How did we arrive with 15 million? Is it the amount that you feel comfortable to start with, or because I'm thinking if once this loan becomes available for NDBP, and with all your plans for housing development and all these small medium enterprise loan programs for to be available, how do you project to use? Excuse me. How do you project to use the $15 million? How long do you think you're going to be able to utilize the whole amount? Is it enough, or shouldn't we be looking at something more? If we are to look at a more visible development, maybe in the next 3-5 years.
Thank you, Senator. I think you raised a series of good questions there, so let me try and address them one by one. First of all, in terms of the amount of the loan, one thing that I'm very conscious of is that Palau is, in terms of its economy, is still recovering from the COVID period. So for the financial year ending 23, the debt to GDP ratio, which is typically the ratio that international investors look at for countries, the debt to GDP ratio for Palau was 71%, which was a record high for Palau. Now, the debt to GDP ratio for the United States of America is way beyond that, but for Palau that's high. That every indication is that will reduce relatively quickly for two reasons. One, the economy is growing as the tourists come back. Second, there are debt repayments that are structured into the compact agreement, for example. So both the amount of debt that is due to be repaid will reduce, and the GDP, the economy amount, will increase. So that ratio should improve. By 2030, it should be significantly lower, let me say that. But at this stage, it's always good for Palau to be aware of just the absolute amount of debt outstanding relative to GDP. What I will say is that in the conversations I've had with SFD, they themselves are getting to know Palau, and what they've made clear is that it's what they call the executing agent that is their important assessment. And in that respect, NDBP is the executing agent. We will execute the underlying loans. We will manage the underlying project development, the underlying borrowers who are doing the construction or in these industry fields. So what they're really doing is getting to know Palau as a country, but they're really getting to know NDBP. They want to know, how professional are we? Are we properly managing our affairs? How good is our quarterly reporting back to SFD in terms of progress? So the 15 million was their initial proposal, really to say, we don't want to put too much on the table. We want to get to know you, see how you operate with that. But they have made it very clear, once they trust and get to know the executing agent, they've already said to me, if you want more, we're willing to give more, but you have to show that you can manage this properly. So then it comes down to, how quickly can we deploy these funds? And then the final question is, there's other fund providers, there's other grant providers out there. I mean, ADB, for example, obviously has an outstanding loan for the Republic. So that's for the government, for the ROP, for the Ministry of Finance to decide which provider to borrow from. But from an overall perspective, I think it's a positive for Palau to have a choice of potential providers. And certainly, as long as NDBP operates as I intend it to operate, then SFD have made it clear that they are willing to increase the loan size in the future.
Well, that's good to know. I think that's basically part of my understanding was, to start with the 50 million, to kind of build on that full faith and credit reputation for Palau, and then if there's a need to further engage for additional fund, I think that would be a way forward for us to look into. Do you foresee any, I understand that for the housing development, do you foresee projects such as like a subdivision? You mentioned you work with, you're already working with 2 states for them to kind of designate lands and maybe give some rights for the bank to go in and develop the lands and sell, whether it's condominium or individual homes to home buyers. That sort of discussion is already ongoing. And so if this money becomes available, it will most likely be used for that purpose.
Yes, exactly right. I mean, what I'm envisaging at this stage, Palau already has a condominium law. It's quite a thick law. What I notice is that some of the developments that have been done in the past, perhaps the maintenance on those sites has not been very good, so I'd like to establish a proper homeowners association. But the intent is to create a site with condominiums, perhaps with a ground floor with a laundrette or a retail store. There could be a kids' playground, there's parking spaces, there's a communal barbecue area, and then perhaps 2 or 3 floors of 1 or 2 or 3 bed condominiums. Most of those condominiums would be sold. In my mind, as a starting point, I've sort of targeted a 1 bed at maybe 65,000, a 2 bed at 75, a 3 bed at 85. That is the sort of number that I'm looking for, because it's something I'll talk at the outreach session I'm doing tonight. I'd like to see what I call a property ladder created. I see a lot of individual standalone homes available in Palau, but for the youth in Palau, perhaps they're too expensive now with the increase in raw material costs. Whereas a condo unit, a 1 bed condo unit, can be built much more cost effectively. But the sale of those units can repay the loan that NDBP would provide to this joint venture. And once the loan had been repaid, then NDBP would step back and the whole development would be left with the state. So they could also earn some ongoing revenue from leasing out remaining units. So that's what we're exploring at the moment, and our lawyer is busy working on the documents at the moment.
So lang floor leader Senator Sungino. Tay job. Senator Mangsaw.
Sula Chair, Mr. Proctor, good afternoon. I just want to just some emphasis on the Minister of Finance's statement. In his letter, he indicated that if we do have access to this particular loan, that it would allow NDBP to lower rates even further. Can you please expound on that? And I'm particularly keen on knowing whether it will just decrease the rates of whatever loan programs will be offered under this 15 million, or will it reduce the rates of the overall loan facilities under the bank right now? That's my first question.
So on interest rates, I think the Senate has seen since I arrived, I've tried to reduce interest rates across a range of products. So back in March, I reduced the standard mortgage rate from 10% to 9%. Just effective September 1, I've reduced the first-time homeowner loan rate from 8% to 7%. That 7% rate is the lowest rate ever that the bank has offered. And the standard rate, when I moved that, it was the first time in 20 years the bank had reduced rates. I've also reduced rates on the home equity loan product. So hopefully I'm beginning to establish some track record in trying to bring rates down. The first priority in terms of how I would use this cheap money, let's say, one of the problems I see with housing development here is the infrastructure costs, meaning the access road, the electrical works, the sewage works, the water works. I see that the private sector struggle to finance that. They can afford to do the construction, but it's actually the infrastructure pre-prep work on site that's the cost. So my thinking is that the loan from NDBP to the joint venture would be at a very low rate, because there wouldn't be any repayments coming during the period where we're preparing the site. So it reduces that period that now means it's economic for us to be able to construct the condos. So that's really how I would deploy or prioritize the deployment of the reduced funding. There is a possibility if, let's say the worst case, if for some reason the joint ventures with the states don't proceed, then clearly this funding can be used to finance regular housing, residential mortgage and the like. What SFD make clear is that we can't refinance existing loans. So if somebody has an existing mortgage with us, we can't use this money to refinance that loan. We can only use this money to finance new construction. But in the future, as long as people continue to build houses or continue to build commercial units or whatever it may be, then we can use this loan. But as I say, priority for me is to do these joint ventures.
Which is a good segue to my next question. And in the spirit of transparency, would you consider this as a borrowed capital or an equity capital?
So now this is trying not to be too technical on the banking, but from a Palau perspective, this is a loan from SFD to Palau. The underlying agreement from the Republic to NDBP is something that we call a subsidiary loan, and it is a subordinated loan. What does subordinated mean? It means that NDBP, if NDBP defaulted, it would have to repay other creditors to NDBP first before it repaid the loan to ROP. And the reason it's structured that way is there's a technical banking regulation called capital adequacy, which measures the strength and resilience of a bank. By structuring this loan from the ROP in this way, it's classified as what we call Tier 2 equity for capital adequacy purposes. And I'm sorry, this is a bit technical banking, but the reason I'm doing it that way is to increase the strength and resilience from an international regulatory perspective. That's why we're structuring it as a subordinated loan. But technically, it's a loan. It's not equity, it's not capital, it's loan. But it's a subordinated loan.
That's very good. Yeah, those what Senator Monsao mentioned is basically was referred to FIC for other comments, and they mentioned those in that in their letter when we received it. There's a defined line on between the equity and the in the capital loans, and that bank can access and use in regards to reporting, basically. Wala Senator Rudim ngariya. Dako bang?
Mr. Proctor, hello. So if you're going to structure it that way, like very creative subordinate loan through the ROP, are you in compliance with the FIC rules?
Yes, there's a regulation, I think it's PR 01.1, capital adequacy from FIC, which sets out the capital adequacy ratios, Tier 1, Tier 2, and this would be Tier 2. So I've deliberately structured it to meet the FIC regulations or be in accordance with FIC.
And would that be in turn putting the ROP as the guarantor, or would be the asset that would be backing the loan on NDBP?
No. So ROP has the obligation to SFD. So whether or not NDBP repays ROP, ROP still has to meet its obligations to SFD. But ROP is not guaranteeing NDBP. It simply has a bilateral loan agreement from ROP to SFD. And separately, we have an obligation from the bank to ROP.
Just a statement of concern, Chairman, Mr. Proctor. The way they tried to do the stable coin as an alternative payment system against the existing banks, and the attempt to use the NDBP as a deposit taker to create that account through the U.S. system, that's just a concern on how this is structured, that there could be an attempt to use the NDBP to be the transit point of funds. So just a footnote on this concern on how it's creatively structured to maybe circumvent, or hopefully not circumvent, the FIC rules and regulations of this region.
No, Senator, I absolutely assure the committee this loan has been specifically structured in accordance with the FIC regulations. And perhaps just to allay your concerns, NDBP has a series of loans that are structured in this way, where an outside party lends to ROP, ROP then lends to NDBP. The difference with this one is this subordination arrangement, which I'm only doing in order to meet the FIC regulations or be in line with FIC regulations.
So lang Senator Rudim, and I have some of the concerns that were raised during our session when we introduced this to the floor, and then it was deferred back. The main question that arose during our session day was, of all the friends and partners with the Republic of Palau, and we've been getting loans through Taiwan and ADB, and those were the main entities that we get loan from. Why do we reach out to the Arab Emirates, especially on Saudi fund, to procure this loan? Concerns were that quite not in favor of human right country, and they also have a lot of turmoil that's going on within that country. How do our partners and donors for the loans, if we need it, if I may say, would see Palau at if we are getting loans from the Saudi Arabian funds? In perspective, they are in Palau is in tier 2, and we're being cautious. Just kind of elaborate on that particular segment.
So I think the first thing I should say is my answer can only be as a banker. I think it's for Palau and Palau's government to decide the international relations for the country. That's not my remit. But from my perspective, the more choice that Palau has in terms of potential partners to work with, the higher the status Palau has in the international community. Saudi clearly is a major player in the oil market. Probably every country in the world has some kind of transactional relationship with Saudi Arabia. But it is not my remit to infer how Palau should choose its international relations. Purely from a banking perspective, it's always going to be to Palau's benefit to be able to negotiate with multiple potential providers to find the best deal at any particular time. I will leave the government to choose its international relations policy. Yeah.
Thank you for that. The main thing is that the loan is very, very favorable on a 15 million loan with a 2.5 interest rate that is fixed for the duration of the loan agreement. And the intent of the loan is to give the bank more capability to provide more housing developments and other services to the Republic of Palau. But as a banker, would this loan from a Saudi, would it make or break Palau in the future based on financing situations that we all have?
A $15 million loan will certainly not break Palau. It's a relatively small loan. I mean, from an SFD perspective, it's tiny. I've already said that. But also from an ROP perspective, this is not the largest loan by any means that ROP has taken. I view it as a banker in the opposite way. I see this as another step forward in Palau's development into the international community. Palau is still a new country in international terms, but I see this as another step up in terms of broadening its integration into the international financing market.
When it comes to the loan agreement and the documents itself, do NDBP have the capabilities to meet all of those conditions in the loan, especially on project and development?
Yes, Chair. I wouldn't have allowed the document to go forward if I was not confident that the bank can meet all of these conditions.
That kind of answers most of the questions that were raised. I'll give the floor to anybody that want to raise the last questions. I'll give it to Senator Sungino.
Sulang Chair, gradim lak jak member mong naso kami state earlier member matamamo da eh. Mr. Proctor, thank you for the opportunity. You know, in a room like this and then all these young people with us, I think to say something that can reflect to them in terms of their mind in the banking system. Credit history is an important aspect in their lives growing up. I think to build your credit history is important for these young people to start building on that credit history. And when I hear you speaking about broadening the lending portfolio for Palau, that's a great idea of trying to build on that. And you mentioned that there are 2 states that you're working with. But my concern is on the essential services in Palau, the nurses, the teachers, the police officers. They're getting out of Palau Community College. They're getting into the workforce, and they're still in the minimum salary range. So to build on that concept on trying to build condominiums, I'm looking at that concept in trying to build affordable housing for those people who are the essential service providers for Palau. Because I have an experience with a nurse who's living beside me. He's a young person with 4 kids, and the wife is a housewife. And he is struggling. He's staying with his parents. So to build on that concept on building condominiums outside, we need to also understand how we can support, let's say, the nurses, the Munes community. Is there a property there that we can build affordable housing for the nurses, which are just on that area? So just for you to consider this when they're coming to you about these things, about trying to help the young people who are struggling, who are getting into the force, but are struggling in terms of housing. How can we put those considerations into order so we can really help the essential workers first? Because those are the roots of trying to keep the community livable, the teachers, the doctors, and the police officers, because those are the essential services. Thank you.
Senator, that's a very good point. I think, in fact, at the outreach session I'm doing tonight, I'll be making some remarks about the real estate market as I see it as a foreigner coming into Palau and as a banker coming into Palau. And I think there's a number of dimensions to this which you know much more than I do. But looking at it with fresh eyes, I see 62% of all homes are in Koror. And so one question I have is, can other states, Arai, Melikiok, Imalik, can they release more land to enable construction close to Koror but outside Koror, so that we don't have such a concentration in Koror? Secondly, I think this idea of condominiums, which are cheaper to build because they share walls and the floor of one condominium is the ceiling of another, so it's cheaper to build. I don't see many condominiums. So can we have that as a first stepping stone so that people coming out of college have an opportunity to own their own property? I understand in Palau the culture is different. So culturally, I think Palauans prefer to live in family units on family land. But as I see the country developing, that may not always be possible. And so giving people the opportunity to buy their own place where they can live, I think gives them a confidence and a self-realization. That's what I'm trying to move towards. The key message from my perspective is, in the past, this bank has always operated just as a bank. We've only done loans. But we're a development bank. So this would be the very first time, I think, that this bank moves into development itself. And I'm sure we have a lot of lessons to come from it, which is why I'm using these 2 states as the first pilot, just to prove that we can make use of the condominium law, that this idea can work. Once it does, I've already had conversations with other states who say, yes, we'd like to explore this as well. So step by step, I'd like, I view it as the National Bank, Development Bank of Palau, and I've said this to Angar State and all the smaller states. I'm not here just for Koror, and I'm not here just for Arai. I'm here for Palau. So if there's facilities I can help in the outlying states, that's my role as well. I just need to prove this concept with these first 2 states, then hopefully we can extend.
Lamungin. Dira kam na chainer kita at tangakal Vice President Senate Senator Cray Marion. Udregi ko ram lasam apertiale takora Saudi Loan Fund. And actually, David Proctor, I appreciate the time that you're here. and joined us for this meeting. And I just want to emphasize that, yes, you are a foreigner, but you're the president of our bank. That makes you a Palawan itself. So whatever you do, it's a great honor to have you. And the bank, as I see fit, really in a financial, the financial situations that they have. You have 38 new mortgage loan applicants that are still waiting, and you have loaned out about 2 point some million for the mortgage. And so the need of the bank to facilitate more funding in and to explore other avenue for other residential market for people of Palau is a great thing. And this loan will definitely help the bank to do that. With this, I'll give the floor to Vice President of the Senate. I'll give the floor to, okay. So I'll give the floor to the President of the Senate for his remark and closing.
Ali, thank you for coming and then share some of the very important issues for the loan that we're trying to get from Saudi Arabia. Now I can understand why you don't like to get the loan at one time, like 15 million. Because we were thinking why they give us that instead of giving it to us one time so we can do a lot of project rather than give us a small loan. So like if we have a lot of project, but the project will be delayed because of the small amount of the loan. But now I can understand what you're coming from. Also about talking about the tax, I look at it that I think it's not only for this Saudi loan that we exempt tax. I think it should be for all the loan that come to NDBP for development should be exempt from tax. Because I can understand now that the purpose of the loan is for certain project. So if you're going to take some of it for other, then the project will be, the money to the project will be lessened. So thank you for that very good point, and I can understand that. Now my concern is the interest. That's my concern because you know the standard of living in Palau is very low. You know, majority of the people cannot afford the loan to build before 1 room, 2 room, 3 bedroom was all right. But since we came into this PGST, now you can feel the burden to the people who like to build their homes. That's another concern. What do you for this development bank? What do you think if we exempt the PGST tax for these homeowners? Because their construction that really consume a lot of the, almost a big percentage of that amount of the money, and then that's another that people are suffering. And so can you help us to understand that?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you all must have seen my presentation tonight that I'm making for the outreach, because I'll be talking about the real estate market, the issues that we've just talked about, and I'll also be talking about 3 other things which I see as all in one bucket. I see in Palau at the moment a lot of attention being placed to PGST. Now, my role, I view myself as a civil servant, so I serve whichever government is chosen, elected by the Palauan people. So my role here today is not to discuss whether one structure of PSGT is better than another, raise and refund or too much too soon, that's not my remit. But what I do see is I see in Palau these three things. The first is demographics. The latest data would show that there are 4,500 Palauans employed, which means that in Palau, there's probably 12,500 Palauans. That's what the latest data would show. So for each individual employed Palauan, roughly, they are carrying on their shoulders 2 dependents who are not employed. They may be children, they may be retirees, but that's a heavy burden for the employed Palauans to be carrying. Secondly, PGST is a new cost. What I will say about PGST, just keeping it at the high level, three things. The first is, I don't think PGST is going away. And the reason I say that is, firstly, a similar tax, GST, is now in place across more than 100 countries in the world. The highest GST rate is in Hungary at 27%. Palau, currently at 10%, is relatively low, but I'm not going to make any comment about what the rate should be. The only comment I make is, I think PGST is here to stay because it's common across other countries. The second thing I would say is that because of the high debt rate that Palau currently has, Palauans will have to pay tax in some form. That's why I think PGST will stay. The third reason is, from the data that I have seen, it does appear that foreigners are paying the majority of this tax. But I will sidestep the issues as to what is the appropriate application of PGST. The third comment that I would make, though, is whilst Palauans spend a lot of time talking about PGST, I would encourage Palauans, and I hope I'm not offending anybody here, but I would encourage Palauans to also include in that conversation Palauan custom. The latest data I received from Patrick Tilley, who obviously records this information, is that last year more than $8 million was raised from Palauan funerals, 179 funerals. That excludes money raised from house parties or from firstborn ceremonies. So from my perspective, it appears as if the traditional Palauan custom was originally there for many reasons, to release the soul from the earth, but also to provide for those in need at difficult times. PGST is now also doing that. So a question I have is, are Palauans paying twice? Are they paying to support the people in need through the traditional custom, and now in addition is paying PGST? And if so, is that sustainable given there's only 4,500 Palauans employed? So my conclusion, and this is the comment I'll make tonight, I would encourage, whenever people talk about PGST, I would encourage people to talk about PGST and Palauan custom. As I see in the past, Palauan custom evolved bringing food. Now Palauan custom is cash, turtle shell, Palauan traditional money, but cash. And I think that the debate for the community should involve the combination of both custom, what is the right way to recognize custom, as well as PGST.
Yeah, thank you for that, but you know, that concept you're talking about is very hard to change it by overnight. That's going to take years. We're talking about now. You know, that's, you may say PG, of course the tax is good. We cannot say the tax is not good. There's a purpose for the tax. My concern is right now, because of PGST, it's expensive. You know, I don't think we can deny that because of that. I'm trying to find a way to help these people who are building their homes and they are struggling. because you can understand that even these people already have a house built, they're struggling to pay. So, thank you for that, but you know, that's very hard to, and our custom cannot be go away by overnight. So even though we're trying to balance, but it will take years. So what I'm trying to do is right now, not you know, take time to adjust.
So on PGST right now, I think the best thing that the bank can do to help is for the bank to take on the cost of infrastructure development for these new condominiums. Because if we use this cheap loan, it allows the bank to finance that cost that the private sector would never be able to afford themselves. And that means that more land can be released and used for the benefit of affordable housing. If the bank didn't do that, this affordable housing could never be built because the cost of the connecting road and the electrical system, the water system, the sewage system to these sites. So I think that's how to bring down the cost for Palauans, because I absolutely agree, the cost of living in Palau, I'm very surprised at how high the cost of living is.
So this Saudi loan, you really need it because there's so many people waiting for the loan?
Yes, Mr. President. At the moment, in March, I introduced this new loan product called Home Equity Loan Product, which was designed for people to use for any purpose. That product has been incredibly successful, to such an extent that we now have a waiting list. We simply can't process all of the applications. Part of it is we're relying on repayments from old loans to give us the money to make the new loans. If we have this Saudi loan, we can accelerate how quickly we can approve these loan applications. So as chair of the committee mentioned, we have a waiting list right now for new home equity loans. We're trying to process them on a first-come, first-served basis. This new funding would allow us to process that much more quickly.
Okay, my question is different. Do you have land now that the bank own, and
No.
you have not confiscate some of the land because they didn't pay? And
we have, I think it's 2 pieces of land. We have one piece of land which is near the bird sanctuary in Niramnui, which cannot be developed because it's in sanctuary area. That was foreclosed in 2012. The only other 2 pieces of land that we have are small lots that again are not in a suitable location for development. So for the condominium developments, that's why I'm working with the states, because they own land that is much more suitable for these kind of developments than the old foreclosed land that the bank has.
right now, do you have any available loan for housing, or you exhaust all the money now so you don't have money to loan?
We are still making loans, but the money we're using comes from customer repayments on our existing loans, and as they repay us, we can make new loans.
So that's all money you have to...
So we have other money that we can only use for certain programs. So we have a loan relating to ADB that is only usable for solar installations on residential homes.
Solar.
So I call it restricted money, where we can only use it for particular purposes. The general bucket of money that we can use for any purpose that's where we have a big limitation. That's where we're dependent on recycling repayments.
Do you have any money that for farm or for fishermen? Do you have any of those loans still available?
Yes, we do. We have a special program for farming, aquaculture, and the fishing sector. And the loans to those three sectors are at 7%. So those are particular programs just available for those industries. So we have money for that.
What about the loan for rooftop solar? Are you still loaning for solar?
Yes, there are two programs for solar. One is for residential houses. We still have money for that, but it seems as if the demand for those loans has really fallen to a very small number each week. There's a second program, which is a $5 million program that's been agreed with ADB. We're waiting for PPUC to confirm the technical specifications of the equipment. Once they do that, we can launch that program. That is designed for commercial businesses, any commercial business, or it could be a church or a medical center or government buildings. So we can install solar onto non-residential offices and buildings.
Are you providing them without battery? Because that's a great concern.
So this is exactly why I've asked PPUC to, because I'm a banker, I don't know the technical specifications.
Yeah.
I've asked PPUC, tell me what the specifications should be. We will issue an RFP under the procurement law, have a clear tender. Whichever vendors win the tender, then they will be the ones that supply the equipment specified by PPUC that we will finance.
You don't have any country or any big institution that you can advise us to borrow money, loan money for the infrastructure like housing?
I think I have no doubt as the economy in Palau improves and this debt to GDP ratio improves, I have no doubt that Palau will be able to access additional funding. The only ridiculousness in the international community is that they use a standard ratio to determine whether a country is wealthy or not wealthy. And that ratio is based on the number of people in the country relative to the size of the economy. So Palau, because Palau is a relatively small population, that ratio turns out to tell the world that Palau is a rich country, which is a nonsense. So I'm afraid my colleagues in the banking community have a lot to apologize for. It's a nonsense, but that's how some of these international fund providers operate.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give the floor to Senator Rudim, and then one more from anybody else, and then we'll do the closing.
Mr. Proctor, a question on the bad loans, the $5.2 million. And I think from your last report, it was about 14% of your portfolio. And I think that's very concerning. So with the performance of those 5.2, and I think you clarify that now most of those loans were not from COVID-related activities. So if you want to push for more loans, what kind of assurance can you provide that you're not going to encounter another huge charge-off on these loans?
So just to give the committee a quick update on the financials for the bank. When I arrived, the bank had 2 years of previous losses. The non-performing loans, as I call them, were 19% of the portfolio. And the loan portfolio, the total loans outstanding was declining. As I sit here today after 12 months, the bank is profitable. Loans have increased 13%, and our non-performing loan is just over 1% of our portfolio. So we have done a lot of work in the last 12 months to turn the wheel of the bank and start pointing in the correct direction. There is always the risk that we will have future losses. But one of the reasons that has helped us improve is because we stopped doing the unsecured microloans, which were very risky. People were coming to the bank, taking a $15,000 loan, and leaving the country. So now we have loan products that we've reduced the interest rate on, so it's better for the people, but it's structured in a way that is less risky for the bank. So I'm trying to fix both sides at the same time, help the people, but also just improve the financials for the bank. And at this stage, the bank's performance is healthy.
Di ahmada ngongyang al tiga ger dol musum ra David Proctor and direkal ngarngi activity tir elol maklok ra kapsangay al kirel abang mang David Proctor, we want to thank you for today's present that you came up to this hearing and gave us some of the insight of this loan document. And the committee will hold a meeting after this hearing and we'll discuss about the procurement of this loan, whether we're going to put it out on the floor or we're going to ask additional questions if we might have. Appreciate your time to be here today, and I'll give you the floor for your last comment, and then we'll close.
Well, thank you, Chair, and Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to come and answer the questions. I hope I've been able to address them in a way that satisfies your concerns. I can assure you that this loan is very important for the future growth of the bank, and I can also assure you that if we receive these funds, we will use it for the purpose that I've outlined, to try to support the development of affordable housing as a priority in Palau, in addition to agriculture, aquaculture, fishing, and tourism sectors. For those that have the time available, I am doing an outreach session tonight. I did a first one as a pilot back in March to invite all public, all media, anybody who wants to attend. It's at Labu Street at West Plaza Hotel from 6 till 8 tonight. I do a presentation, and then I take whatever questions people want to ask. So everybody is more than welcome to attend. And if you don't have a chance to attend, I think the cameras will be there, so you can always watch it subsequently on YouTube. But thank you so much for the committee, and I really appreciate the open dialogue that this committee allows me to have, and all the support that this committee in particular and the Senate provide the bank. It's that partnership that the stronger we can make it, the easier it is for us all to help Palau move in the right direction.
Thank you so much. I think you sums up the hearing very well. The intent of the hearing was just to make sure that the loan that we're looking for to have will be rightfully used for the intent and the purpose of the loan agreement. Other than that, we thank you so much, and the Senate committee is always open on your remarks and any comments if you may have. Thank you, Mr. David Proctor.